It is important that you have a basic knowledge of what happens in your body as a woman, and also as men, you're not left out, so you can learn. Now, in this video, I'll be talking about the female reproductive cycle. Now, this cycle is oftentimes known as the menstrual cycle. Okay. Now, this cycle is broadly divided into two. We have the ovarian cycle, and the uterine cycle. So these two cycles makes up the female reproductive cycle. Okay. Now, if you observe, I made two diagrams here. So over here, I'll be explaining the ovarian cycle, what happens in the ovaries. And here, I'll be explaining the uterine cycle. Now, it is very important that you know that these processes are controlled or coordinated by the brain, okay? And that's the structure you have here, okay? So this is the hypothalamus of the brain. It's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. Now, attached to the hypothalamus is a gland known as the pituitary gland. And for the sake of this video, we are going to be talking about the anterior part of the pituitary gland, okay? Now, this pituitary gland has a function of secreting a type of hormone known as the GRH, okay? So this GRH is known as the gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Okay, so GRH stands for gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Now, these hormones are divided basically into two. We have the FSH and the LH. These two hormones perform different functions. Now, I just want to establish these facts. Then I will explain when I am explaining the ovarian cycle. Okay. Now, FSH simply stands for follicle stimulating hormone. So you have, sorry, the body is small. Follicle stimulating hormone. And LH stands for luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone. Okay. So having said that, let's come over to the ovarian cycle now. Now, you would notice that I made a structure here. This structure is known as the primordial cells, or you can say the primordial follicle. Primordial follicle. Okay, or primordial cell. Now, these are also known as the immature egg cells. Okay, now it develops to form a type of cell known as the primary oocyte. The primary oocyte. So, because of further differentiation and further development, the follicles around the egg becomes thick. The follicles around the egg becomes thicker than that of the primordial cells. Okay, so this is the primary oocyte. Now from here, another development occurs, leading to another type of oocyte known as the secondary oocyte. Now the secondary oocyte has thicker follicles. The follicles in the secondary oocyte are cuboidal in shape, thicker follicles. Now the function of these follicles is just to protect the egg that contains the genetic material. So these are the follicles that protect the egg. So this is known as the secondary oocytes. Secondary oocytes. Okay. Now, this secondary oocyte also, after some time, develops to form what we know as the Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle. Now, the Graafian follicle is thicker than the secondary oocyte. So you have the egg coated by layers of follicles. By layers of follicles. So the layers here are thicker than that of the secondary oocyte. Okay. So this we can say is the Graafian follicle that contains the egg. Now, at this point, something happens. At this point, something happens. But let me move over to the brain. You see, this whole process is controlled by the follicle stimulating hormone. So what happens here from this primordial cell, since the egg cells are covered with follicles, the follicle, the gonadotrophin releasing hormone, releases the follicle stimulating hormone to synthesize the follicles you have over here. So this hormone plays a role in synthesizing or producing the follicles for the primary oocyte, secondary oocyte, and the Graafian follicle. Okay, now these follicles also produce a hormone. That hormone is known as the estrogen. Now, what is the function of the estrogen? The estrogen helps to prepare the lining of the uterine wall. Okay, so there is a close relationship between the brain and this process, because the estrogen released from the follicles helps to prepare the uterine wall. So the uterine wall becomes thicker. It becomes thicker. Now this uterine wall is being prepared for the baby, for implantation of the egg, or you can say the zygote after fertilization. Okay, so that happens there. Now, after this stage, the luteinizing hormone comes in. Now, what does luteinizing hormone do? It tells this follicle to open up. So the follicles open up and become an empty follicle. It becomes an empty follicle, just like this, releasing the egg. So this is just the egg that is being released by the Graafian follicle into the fimbriae. So the eggs are being released into the fimbriae and it's collected by the fimbriae and it moves down here, this point, to the fallopian tube. This place is known as the fallopian tube or the oviduct. Okay, it is moved here and it gets to this point. On getting to this point, it is waiting for fertilization. Now, at this point, before then, the Graafian follicle, the empty Graafian follicle, is known as the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, which means yellow body. Yellow body. Now, this corpus luteum also produces a type of hormone which we know as the progesterone. The progesterone further prepares the uterine wall. It further prepares the uterine wall. Now, the preparation of the uterine wall is just thickening of the uterine wall, of the endometrial wall. Okay, so the endometrine just gets thick for receiving the baby for implantation. Okay, now having said that, at this point where the egg is in the oviduct, two things can happen. If a sperm gets into this part and swims directly to the ovary, because this is where the fertilization takes place. It takes place in the oviduct or the fallopian tube. If it gets to this point, what happens is that if fertilization takes place here, this egg will be fertilized and it will become a zygote, and it will move down to this point. It will move down to this point, the endometrial wall, and be implanted, and the zygote will further develop from there. So it's important to know that at this point where it is implanted is where the placenta will grow from. Okay, so that is that. Now that's the first thing that can happen. The second thing that can happen is if there is no sperm fertilizing the egg. Remember, the walls of the uterine have been prepared already to receive the zygote. So if there is no sperm that fertilizes the egg, what happens is that the egg doesn't actually come out. That is what most people don't know. The egg disintegrates in the fallopian tube or the oviduct. It begins to dissociate and disintegrate into little parts in the oviduct. Now, after like 14 days, you would notice that the lining of the uterine wall begins to detach. Now remember, this preparation, this lining are just filled of blood vessels, okay, and tissues. So the linings of these parts begins to detach out, and that is what comes out as the period or menses or menstrual blood. It is not the oocyte that comes out. It is the prepared lining of uterine wall that detaches from the uterine wall and comes out. And this takes about 3 to 5 days on average. Okay, so this is what happens. This is what happens in the system of every female, precisely every month. Okay, so I have explained the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. From the primordial follicle, it goes into the primary oocyte. Primary oocyte, it goes into the secondary oocyte. Secondary oocyte into the Graafian follicle or Graafian oocyte. All these stages are covered or protected by follicle, and this follicle is being synthesized or produced by the follicle stimulating hormones. It stimulates the production of the follicles. Okay, now the follicles also produce estrogen that prepares the uterine wall, and this empty follicle, which is the corpus luteum, produces the progesterone that also further prepares the uterine wall. Okay, so after that, this egg is released from this point into the fimbriae of the fallopian tube. Now it is important that that release of egg from the Graafian follicle into the fimbriae of the fallopian tube is known as ovulation. This release is what we can term as ovulation. Okay, so that's what happens in the female reproductive cycle. I hope this was clear enough for you to understand. Okay, so in my next video, I'll be talking about something more important. I'll be talking about how to calculate your safe period, how to calculate your fertile window, ovulation, and how to know your cycle length. It is very important. Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and see you in my next video.